There are many, many different ways to do contemplative practices, more than there are brain cells in your head or stars in a galaxy. And the reason is because each moment is unique, and you are unique in each of those moments. But what would it be like if you had a step-by-step way to approach this, one that's accessible and makes things make a little bit more sense to you? Hello, and welcome to Mindfulness Voyage. My name is Ted Meissner, and I'm coming to you from the top of Peaked Mountain here in Munson, Massachusetts. And welcome. I'm so glad you could join us today, whether you're here from my older podcasts, The Secular Buddhist or Present Moment, Mindfulness Practice and Science, or you just found this organically. Welcome. I'm glad you could be here with us today. As mentioned, there are a lot of different ways to engage with mindfulness or contemplative practices. And today, our guest Shalini Bahl is going to share about one structure she's created and has a book published about it. Come on, let's meet Shalini. Our guest today is my friend Shalini Bahl. Shalini, good to see you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, it's good to have you on this. And I was so excited to hear about your new book. And before we get into what's in the book, I'd like to ask you, what made you write this particular book? Because what's in there is very interesting. And we'll get to that. But I know that what would have prompted you to write it is something else. So I want to hear about that in your own words.
Of course. Um, what prompted me to write this is a moment of huge disappointment for me. I had applied to this big job that I thought was my perfect job. And, there are not too many jobs in mindfulness. So this was like right up my alley. And I really worked hard for it. I prepared. I went through all the rounds, made it to all the rounds. Finally, it was an actual presentation. I did the presentation, invited my executive friends to give me feedbacks. I really went all out. And when I presented, there was that energy. I felt like we were connected. I was connecting with the recruiting team there. We ended with hugs. It was like, so like, I was like, I've landed. This is my place. These are my people. And we hugged. And as you can expect, I didn't get that job. And it was super disappointing. And my earlier self would have done spiritual bypassing, which I'm very good at. Is like, oh, it's all for the good. I'm sure there's a perfect reason for this. This time, as I've grown in my practice, I realized it's okay to feel disappointed. And I stayed with that disappointed and grief for a couple of days, maybe. And at some point, when I was ready looking in, like, what about this disappointment feels so terrible to me? And I heard myself saying that I was really hoping to reach more people through this organization because I work on my own and here was an opportunity. And so then the next question was, okay, now that I didn't get that job, what is another way to reach more people? And so then it was like, okay, I have good insights. I think, I research, I write. How about I put all of that in a book?
Mm-hmm.
So that's how. But of course, as there are many other pivotal moments that led up to that place where I felt ready to launch, but that's what.
Thank you for sharing that. And this is one of the things that I found in reading through the book is that one of the things you did really well with this is just an honest engagement with the stumbles along the way and how that as a person out in the world struggling with disappointments and difficulties and things going not the way we had planned or intended or hoped is part of life. And you deal with that in the book. So thank you for bringing that up. I really appreciate it. And let's talk a little bit about what's in there. Oh yeah, go ahead.
And that story that I just shared is not in the book.
Yeah,
So
this
that
was
was
a new
one.
one.
Yeah, that's a new one.
Yeah.
Thank you for asking that question.
Yeah. So you divided the book into three parts. Now, part three is resources stuff, which is really great part of this. I'm wondering if you might describe a bit the relationship without going into kind of what's in there in detail, the relationship between parts one and part 2? Because there's a reason you crafted it the way you did.
Right. Part one is more providing the overall framework for why I chose this particular way of um, encouraging, inviting people to practice mindfulness in this particular way in the real world. So it provides the background, the science, the original teachings from which I drew from, and then the science that I looked at. So it really provides the logic and the framework, what we're going to be doing in part two. And then part two is really looking at each of the 8 skills that the book is about, the 8 mindfulness skills, and then going deep into the nuances of it, or what does this really mean, each of these skills, and how to practice them in the real world. So that was the real focus of the second part, is how do we practice mindfulness in the real world?
Mhm. Yeah, and these skills in part 2, that's what I want to dive into a bit more. It's not a traditional set, one might say, that one might have from that particular context. So I'm wondering if you might say a little bit more about how did you develop and land with this particular set of 8, because it's not what one might typically find.
Right. Yeah, when we look at mindfulness, we think of awareness, compassion, curiosity, or other general frameworks. The scientific ones in research have used like MAS, or mindful awareness and attention, or there is um, observation, awareness, non-judgment. So those were the traditional frameworks out there for but in my own experience of learning within the secular training, as just as you did, and that's how we met at the MBSR training, which was really deep and profound. And also, when I started teaching it very early on, realizing that, oops, there is some gaps. Like, on the cushion, I'm feeling really calm and clear. And then in the world, I seem to be making the same choices or same errors. And my decision making is not quite changing. Not all, there was a lot of changes, of course. I was less reactive, there was more stillness. There was more empathy for myself. So there were definitely changes happening, but somehow the bigger changes in my decision making were not happening. So that's what got me to then look back into the original teachings on which a lot of the secular trainings, including Dr. John Kabat-Zinn's teachings, or Thich Nhat Hanh, or many of the teachings in the secular world, are based on the Buddha's teachings, specifically the mindfulness discourse called the Satipatthana Sutra. And I bow to the translation by Joseph Goldstein that became, right after my MBSR program, that became like my Bible, where I was like, oh, this is why we're doing what we're doing in week 3 or week 4. And it really gave me the depth. But within that learning, I also saw that in different ways, they were alluding to the fact that along with the meditation, we also need to cultivate these habits of the mind. And because even though we get profound insights when we're meditating, when we're out in the world, our other cells, and now I'm bringing my science part, which is that our other cells come into play. So the meditator self may be different from the mother self, the business self, the educator self. And so if we want all the cells and in all situations to be able to return to this place of clarity, then one way to do that is to start cultivating these habits of the mind. So now coming to your question of why these particular 8 mindfulness skills or habits of the mind, in the original teachings, the Buddha alluded to different taxonomies. There are different lists and lists, and there are lists of Brahma Viharas and Paramitas and bhujangas. So particularly, so taking a combination of looking at all of these different qualities of the mind, which were described as liberating factors, really liberating us from our suffering, our stress. So that's how, and these were the different qualities that were discussed in the original teachings. So I took it from there, but then I looked at it from the modern science lens of, psychology. Like I'll just mention the 8 skills: awareness, which needs to be accompanied with compassion, and that comes with curiosity. We need energy to bring curiosity, and we need appreciative joy. There is inner calm, focus, and equanimity. So looking at each of these skills then from the lens of science, like psychology and management and leadership, business, it really made sense. Okay, I can see why these skills are really important, and all of them are disrupting particular biases that we have. And by disrupting those, they allow us then to return back to that place of clarity. So I'll pause for a moment to digest all that.
Yeah, that's a good explanation of where this came from, and that it's not just a lift and drop out of a traditional setting. This is informed by science and what we see in the real world. And what I
Yeah.
like about the way you've crafted this and wrote this up in my endorsement for the book is that you make this very pragmatic, is that this is how to do that. The thing that you're describing as what you were just talking about to me is integration. It's got to have
Mm.
that time on the cushion, and that self, that best me, even
Mhm.
when it's a best me when my mind is scattered and not calm, or I'm dealing
Mhm.
with the difficulty or what it happens to be. How do I bring that into the rest of my day?
Yeah.
That's one of the things that you address with each of these skills. So what I want to go
Mhm.
next into is, as you're writing that and running into your own difficulties,
Mm.
because you do have your own daily life. You are not a monastic off on a mountaintop. You're living a very active life. What were some of the things that may have been new encounters to you or new perspectives that showed up as you were wrestling with your own difficulties in daily life?
Absolutely. Such a great question, because that was the second or third huge shift in my own writing of the book that really informs how the book ended up. And that second or third, this big shift was when I joined politics. And so before that, I was just focusing as a mindfulness researcher. My PhD is in marketing, so I'm still doing research. I'm teaching this as an MBSR, search and site self teacher. So I'm like fully immersed in this world of mindfulness and feeling really confident. And so whatever opportunities life happened, and I ended up running for town council, won that. And I was like so confident. And my intention was of bringing mindfulness and healing and bridging the divisiveness in my own town. And lo and behold, the first and very first encounter I had with a resident who said to me was, I'm not going to vote for you because XYZ. And to me, that felt really unfair. And I immediately went, I was still calm because of my long practice, took some deep breaths, and I went into defending myself and justifying like why they were wrong and why, why what I'm doing is absolutely right. And it was a big speech I gave to that person. And then it was, obviously our practice is such that we always come back to the practice. And when I did practice and I saw, wow, where was my curiosity? Where was my empathy for the other person's perspective? Like, I have no clue what were their life's experiences that led them to this conclusion about me. And so I actually wrote back to them then. And that's part of the other thing of the practice is like we don't just end with the thing. We're like, okay, now what can I do? What is a skillful action I can take now that I know that I messed up instead of beating myself about it? So I wrote to them and fixed another opportunity to have a dialogue. And we had a wonderful dialogue. And by the end, we hugged. Okay, as you can make out, team over here, I'm a big hugger.
I remember.
I I hug people who don't like me. I hug potential company hiring me. Big hugger. So yeah, those were some of the things that I realized, and I took a pause in writing the book when I joined politics, was like, wait, I need to again step back and see what is it that's going to allow me to take these skills, because I was already writing about these skills. I'd already created a mindfulness 2.0 class by then, but I'm still not being able to bring it into actual in the middle of council meetings and so forth. So I've forgotten what the question was.
It's okay. It's getting to a space of just what you've encountered. And
Yeah.
actually, this is a good segue into, okay, with that experience you just related, what are some of the things that you've been teaching for a while now? What are some of the skills that other people you're seeing seem to have a hard time with? And it may be different things crop up in different settings, whether it's in your political career, family life, whatever it happens to be. What are some other things you're seeing that
Yeah.
others are going to be running into?
Yeah. A big one that's coming up for that I'm seeing is underappreciated is appreciative joy, which is a combination of delighting in all that's good in our lives and gratitude for that. So that's one of the skills in the book. And in working with very different groups of people, like nurses, for example, I was working with this group of nurses and they're like, we want MBSR, we want stress reduction. I'm like, okay, talk to me. Tell me, what's going on for you all? Tell me about your day and what's happening. What are some challenges you encounter? And as I heard them, I'm like, you know what? You might benefit from appreciative joy along with compassion for yourselves, compassion for the patients, but also appreciative joy for why you chose this profession, why you love what you do. And along with awareness, of course, the first module was an awareness, and then there was compassion, then there was appreciative joy, and then the last one was, I forget, decision making or something. And out of all the four modules, they loved appreciative joy the most, and I think that's what I have found, even for myself as a perfectionist. I'm always doubting myself before every meeting, every speech I give. And maybe that's just common to everyone, but I think I'm a notch higher than everyone who's like, no, 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 you definitely need to spend a little more time working. You definitely need to research more and do more before you can go out and speak. And so for me, appreciative joy has been such an important practice and play that I play with all the time, reminding myself of the goodness in myself, my good intentions. It's okay. I'm an imperfect human being doing my best. So I really, really recommend appreciative joy and in teams for companies. And there's this Harvard Business Review article as well that I cite, I think, in the book that really talks about how team building and companies that are really making time to have fun together and to celebrate each other, celebrate the wins, are more likely to be productive and do well and more resilient. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the territory and the role of the nursing profession. I train hundreds of nurses every year in both a mindfulness course and burnout course. And what I typically find is that for many of the nurses, and not all, of course, your individual mileage may vary. So if you're a nurse here, this might connect with you, maybe not.
Yeah.
Is that those who are having difficulties even staying within the profession. And there's a huge turnover rate because of burnout with
Yeah.
nursing and other professions as well, but just talking about nursing for the moment.
Right.
Much of that is shifting from, well, what brought you into nursing in the first place? Like, well, this wonderful aspect of helping people is typically what comes up a lot of the time. Okay, and is that there now? Like, no, not so much. And Shalini, what you're describing, that appreciative joy, that delight in, I've made a difference in someone else's life. There's a tendency, a natural tendency, not just in people, but in life forms, to want to pull away from that which is unpleasant
Mhm.
And in nursing, you're dealing with unpleasantness, difficulties all the time. And it's a normal response for people to have, to maybe even not knowingly pull away from that. And so one of
Mhm.
the shifts that helps with burnout and does help with just how they're feeling within themselves is that appreciative joy, that mudita of
Mhm.
connecting with others in their distress too, and making a difference. It doesn't have to be a complete fix of whatever ails them. It can be a moment of just carrying presence, and
Mhm.
really inhabiting that moment can make a huge difference to both the person who is the caregiver and the person receiving it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and that being said, I think it's important to mention the systemic issues that lie in the nursing industry where
Yep.
they are overworked, and that needs to change. So this always, we have to keep that front and center is while we're individually empowering people to live their lives more fully and with more grace and ease, I think part of what I'm really drawn to is also empowering them to be assertive and ask questions, not in a fighting way, but where there are opportunities to look for opportunities to speak up, to talk to their bosses, to their managers, to ask for change, to ask for what they need for themselves. And then overall, what I'm personally really interested is working in change, systemic change. And that's part of why I joined town politics, was how can I help with systemic changes in our own government? And now after 2 terms, I'm coming out of it. I'm like, okay, maybe I'm better off training the change makers
Mhm.
to have the skill sets to disrupt their own biases, to hear in from the voices of the people whose lives they're trying to change, like, and not come up with our solution, like, here's what you need, but more really engage the people for whom we are creating
Yep.
these solutions, right? And so that's where my interest really is in, because all of these skill sets are allowing us to disrupt our biases.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so fascinating. Just this morning, on as of this recording, I
Mhm.
posted on LinkedIn research indicating that wellness programs don't really help,
Mm,
which I've known because I've gone through 4 decades of research on burnout, let alone 4 decades of research on mindfulness.
mm,
And it's kind of like the holding the canaries accountable for the toxicity of the coal mine. And that's not it. We need to change the conditions that are causing burnout, stress, depression, anxiety, whatever it happens to be. And yes, there can be personal aspects of self care to
right.
help with that. And we still need to change the conditions. And those,
Right.
I like the way you put it, systemic changes, because what's been most effective,
Mm-hmm.
system changes to the conditions
Mm.
that are causing that in the first place. So it's fascinating. We will never be bored in what we do.
Well, thank you so much for, can I just say thank you again for your years of commitment to continuing to share the latest research with all of us.
Yeah,
I'm
glad
gonna
to.
go.
And hats off to the researchers. They're the ones doing the heavy lifting on all of
We're
this.
all playing a role, right? I mean, really. So recently, when we had a special issue, not we, whoever, the Journal of Consumer Affairs had a special issue, and I was one of the special editors in that. Um, and the papers that we got, it was so apparent to me. Like, one of the papers specifically looked at the language that is used in mindfulness by researchers and by regular people. Like, what does mindfulness mean to them? And then marketers. And it
Yep.
was so interesting, right? The gap, because the people use the word care a lot in when they thought of mindfulness. And in research, none of the definitions of mindfulness really include the word care.
Mhm.
So I thought that was really interesting. And that's why I was thinking we need people who are doing that translation and who are making that connection. And that was another big theme that, yeah, there's all that research happening in a vacuum. And how is it really impacting the people? Because, yeah.
In
So,
the midst
yeah,
of it.
all this to say that we're all playing a role in doing the research, but then translating that, bringing it out to the people, and then teaching them. Anyway, so.
It's so interesting that you bring this up, the word care, because a year or so ago, I was on Ki Hong's podcast and he'd asked, in your own words, how would you define mindfulness? And out of the blue, the phrase just showed up, showing up with care.
Oh,
And it's this active thing, showing up,
right.
and that inclusive of presence and care, all in the IAA model. Folks who have been watching this video podcast now, I started with the IAA model.
Mm-hmm.
It's all included in that. And it's an easy way to describe this for folks who might not be familiar with it. And of course, there's lots of layers underneath that. It's more complicated than just that surface. But that word care is a part of it in at least two ways. Care in terms of a gentleness and an awareness of how we are in the moment, like you might hold a butterfly with care, that ginger gentle care, but also the emotional care, the friendliness, the compassion, the whatever that happens to be. So thank you for bringing up that word, Shalini.
Yeah, of course. And the researcher who brought it up. And I think care also disrupts this habit we have. Like, I think of all the town council meetings, everything's so rushed. Like, we're in such a rush that we forget why we're doing this is because we care.
Yeah.
And so.
All right, one shift before we finish up today.
Yes.
This is to a direction just in the field of mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And you've been involved with this for many years now. What do you see as some of the things that may be missing within mindfulness today? What would you like to see different about the field of mindfulness in the next few years?
Oh, that's my favorite question. Okay, so here's my wish list for anyone out there who's practicing and bringing it out into the world, that we include the full process of mindfulness as a practice, which in the West, we focus so much on the meditation aspect, which is so important because it's the training of the mind to regain control over our attention, over our mental processes for well-being. And that is just one of the steps in the practice. And the second step, which leads to then wisdom and insight. So once we have meditated, leaving a little room for listening to our own wisdom, listening to what's surfacing, what are our causes and conditions, what are our intentions, what's going on. So cultivating the right understanding about any situation. And then the third aspect, which is totally, I feel, been missed out, and of course a lot of people are talking about it now, is the ethical conduct.
Yeah.
And I think of that as skillful actions or mindful habits, because the way that ethical action or conduct was described in the original teachings was not like dogmatic or like thou shalt do this or not. It was more like, what are your intentions and how can you align your thoughts, your speech, and your actions with your intentions? And what happens when you don't? What happens when you cause harm to other people? How does that make you feel? So it's just a more inquiry-based model rather than a punitive model of us through our own process of self-discovery and questioning the choices we're making, even the choice to what thought I'm going to spend time over, to the speech. Is this helpful right now? And to the choices that I'm making. So throughout the day, how do we align our thought, speech, and action with our intentions of how we want to live, how we want to show up? So to me, that is a very important piece. And then, of course, the book focuses on, which also the paper we did in the Journal of Consumer Affairs, the idea was in different situations, we need different qualities of the mind. And which is one of the reasons why I think some of the experiments that don't work out, like, oh, mindfulness didn't work, was because they were using just that breathing, and then expecting people to make completely different decisions and suddenly become more productive and effective because They had done some breathing, and yes, that breathing can make you more effective in certain situations. However, in other situations, maybe they needed more curiosity to solve the to get a better perspective, or maybe they needed more empathy to listen to the people who they're going to, impact. So, and that's what we showed in the paper, was that we need a different combination of skills, these 8 skills, for stress reduction, and we need a different combination of skills for life satisfaction. And that was just to sort of showcase that different situations require different skill sets. And so I would love for people, of course, to read the book or read the original teachings and find ways to really cultivate these habits of the mind. And as I think it was Shantideva, who 8th century scholar, who said, may in all situations and all times, mindfulness be my habit, or something. Wait, I think I wrote it down. At all times and in any situation, how can I make mindfulness my constant habit?
Wonderful quote. Glad you shared that one. And one final question for people who would like to hear more from you. What is the website address that you'd like to share?
Yeah. So it's knowyourmind.training.
Great. Well, thank you for being here. For folks who've been watching, you know what to do with the likes and shares and all that good stuff. You don't need me to tell you. So do that when you can. Be sure to check out knowyourmind.training. And our guest today, Shalini Bahl. Nice to see you again. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Ted.
Thanks for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and check out Shalini's work. And remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time.